Now, we're going to turn next to a local government and communities debate on motion 20280 in the name of James Dornan on empty homes in Scotland. Could I invite all members who wish to contribute to this debate to press their request to speak buttons? And I call on the convener, James Dornan, to open the debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to open this debate on empty homes in Scotland on behalf of the Local Government and Communities Committee. Today's debate reflects on the findings of a short inquiry we began in spring 2019, reporting on 10th of November 2019. And I thank the Minister for responding to our report in time for today's debate. I note that in relation to some of our recommendations, work is ongoing and he has committed to providing further updates as this work progresses. We look forward to receiving these updates over the course of the parliamentary session. Different communities face their own unique challenges when it comes to the issue of empty homes. In some areas, as is the case in some of our small towns, large numbers of empty homes can be symptomatic of industrial and population decline, with more homes than people who now want to live there. This can cause a downward spiral, leading to the loss of amenities such as schools and bus routes, which in turn can affect the health and well-being of local communities. This often causes more people to move away when the local community can't support their increasing support needs, further increasing the number of empty homes in a community. And so the cycle can go on. In other areas, the problem is very different. Economic decline cannot explain the existence of empty homes in desirable places to live where there are housing shortages. In these cases, the presence of each empty home almost always has a backstory involving personal issues, for example, a bereavement or family problems. Or someone may have purchased a property to renovate it, but ran out of money before they could complete the repairs. Whatever the cause, the common thread is that empty homes, if left to decay, can cause a blight in communities, and there's a strong public interest to bring them back into use. In areas of high housing demand, they are also a wasted resource. We gathered information on the impact of empty homes and potential solutions using a number of different means. The committee is always keen that the work we do is largely informed by the views of those with lived experiences. We therefore invited some individuals with personal experience of the issue to chat with us over lunch at the Parliament. This, we felt, provided a comfortable space for people to speak to us freely about their experience of empty homes. We also travelled to East Ayrshire to see for ourselves the impact that large numbers of empty homes can have on communities and speak directly to those people who had been affected. Anonymised accounts of those discussions are available on our website. Following an open call for views, which attracted a number of interesting and informative responses, we also followed up on some of the issues raised in public formal oral evidence sessions with the Minister for Local Government, Housing and Planning, Kevin Stewart, and a number of experts. Not that I'm suggesting for a second that the Minister isn't an expert. I would like to thank all those who engaged with us during our inquiry on behalf of the committee. An early theme to emerge from our inquiry was the importance of every council having a dedicated empty homes officer, someone with local knowledge to deal with the issue in their area. We heard strong evidence to suggest that having a dedicated officer in place leads to more empty homes being brought back into use. It's therefore extremely disappointing that some councils don't have empty homes officers, and some of those do not appear to have plans to recruit one. We believe that all councils should have empty homes officers, and that the evidence suggests that's the case. A key role for the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership, the lead agency in helping to bring private sector empty homes back into use, is to provide valuable training and support for these empty homes officers. The partnership advocated strongly for each local authority to have at least one dedicated EHO as standard practice, and it's encouraging that their funding has been doubled until 2021. It's also welcome to hear the Minister's commitment to continuing to encourage councils to appoint empty homes officers, and through the Empty Homes Partnership, facilitate the sharing of best practice in their empty homes work to achieve maximum benefits. We look forward to receiving an update from the Minister on progress in that regard in just less than a year's time. We also recognise that each area has its own unique set of circumstances and that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to tackling the problem. That's why an EHO in each area who knows the local issues and can build local relationships is so crucial. In turn, this means that solutions are locally led by people with on-the-ground knowledge. These solutions should read across to local regeneration plans, so that there's a joined-up strategy to regenerate areas blighted by empty homes. Restoring some buzz to our town centres is sometimes as much about encouraging people to move back and stay in our town centres as it is about supporting local businesses. More people living in our town centres helps to create safe and vibrant places for people to live, shop, eat and drink. Therefore, I'm pleased to see that the Minister will work with COSLA to encourage councils to adopt a more strategic approach to town centre regeneration and related policies, and we will follow progress with interest. Presiding Officer, it was raised that current data sets may not actually provide an accurate picture of the scale of the issue of empty homes. It was therefore encouraging to hear that the Empty Homes Partnership was working on a method to map the location of empty homes at a granular level, to provide a more detailed picture and allow solutions to be targeted to meet the needs of each area. Whilst this was to be welcomed, we heard that local recording of empty properties is largely reliant on a mixture of local council tax records and local knowledge, and that some people fail to disclose their empty property to avoid paying council tax surcharges. It's therefore a welcome assurance that the Empty Homes Partnership's new website will make it easier for members of the public to report empty homes in their neighbourhood and identify those who seek to abuse the system. The committee would be grateful for updated figures on the scale of the problem once this work has concluded. Presiding Officer, councils have powers to apply an additional council tax levy on those properties which have been empty for some time in order to encourage property owners to bring their empty homes back into use. In some cases, this involves removing council tax discounts and applying an increase of up to 100% where appropriate. We support the levy as a method for bringing empty homes back into use, and it was welcome that some councils were using their discretion to delay the application of the levy for those house owners which were taking active steps to bring their properties back into use. But it was extremely concerning to hear that some councils took a far less discretionary approach and appeared to be using the levy as a revenue-raising tool, taking a blanket approach to its application, and in some cases, penalising people who are taking steps to bring their houses back into use. You will appreciate, of course, that this is usually completely counterproductive. It's absolutely not what any council should be doing with the power, and it should stop. I therefore welcome the fact that the Government will work with COSLA and local authorities to ensure that best practice is shared and that the levy is applied as intended. We again look forward to hearing back from the Scottish Government on the outcome of this exercise. Officer, we also heard about existing public funding or financial incentives for bringing empty homes back into use. Evidence indicated that these do some good, but there's a degree of frustration with some aspects of their operation, which limit how useful they can be. It's encouraging that the Government will use this evidence and views raised during the Housing to 2040 consultation to reconsider the provision of financial incentives, such as the Rural and Islands Housing Fund. And I understand that discussions around the empty homes loan funding and flexibility have already begun. And again, we look forward to receiving an update on these issues. Councils have powers to bring empty homes back into use, compulsory purchase orders. They can use these to buy properties in their area without the owner's agreement. Obviously, this should be used as a last resort when it comes to empty homes. For example, where a property has considerable blight on the community and the owner will not constructively engage, and it requires weighing up whether there's a strong public interest in making such an order, taking into account the rights of the landowners and others with an interest in the land. We heard that there had been a very low uptake of these powers. Council's reluctance to use them was put down to a number of factors, starting with the complexity of the CPO process and the time needed to do one. Other related factors mentioned included competing resources and Council's risk aversion to using court proceedings against private individuals. We know that recent improvements have been made to the CPO process, and it's probably too soon to assess how these have impacted on bringing empty homes back into use. But I do know that the Government will continue with measures to promote their use, whilst keeping under review and identifying where there are barriers and produce additional guidance where required. I would be interested to hear from the Minister what the Scottish Government can do to encourage less risk aversion from councils when it comes to taking out such court proceedings, as this is the evidence suggested to us that that was one of the main reasons some councils seem to find it much easier to do than others who weren't willing to take that chance in court. The Government has also committed to longer-term measures to reform the CPO system as part of a wider package of proposals that will address how authorities can assemble land, tackle problem properties and capture land value uplifts. but we are a little disappointed to note that we're unlikely to see concrete proposals until next session. There was also a lot of evidence calling for the introduction of compulsory sale order powers as an alternative to CPOs. These would force problem properties onto the open market and remove the requirement for councils to purchase them. The Government had committed to bring forward such powers this parliamentary session. However, we have heard from the Minister that these would now be delayed due to other legislative priorities and Brexit. This is disappointing, and whilst recognising the increasing workload Brexit has created for the Scottish Parliament, our report called for a reconsideration on this point. The Government has not accepted a recommendation to bring CSOs forward this session, but the Minister has clarified that this work will be rolled into the wider package of proposals I mentioned a moment ago, including consideration of how councils can assemble land, tackle problem properties and capture land value uplifts. I hope this package can be implemented, therefore, early in the next session. In summing up, Presiding Officer, it's clear that whilst there has been progress in tackling empty homes and the impact they have in Scotland's communities, there's still some way to go. The committee will follow with interest how the problem is factored into the Government's wider housing strategy, and I note that these are being consulted on as I speak. I'd like to finish off by thanking the clerking team, my fellow committee members, as always, for their support, never a cross word in our committee. And I move the motion in my name on behalf of the Local Government and Communities Committee. Thank you.
I now call Kevin Stewart for around 10 minutes. Please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and Happy New Year to you and to all in the Chamber. I welcome the Local Government and Communities Committee's recent report on empty homes, and I've considered the report in detail, and I'm pleased to accept the recommendations. And my response to the committee sets out the actions that we are already taking, as well as those to be progressed over the course of the next year. And Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm pleased to say the committee is generally supportive of our approach, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for the useful evidence that's been gathered. And I'd like to thank the stakeholders that also took part and took the time to respond. The debate this afternoon gives us a great opportunity to focus on the priority that we place both in Parliament and in the Government on empty homes and the actions we're taking to bring them back into use. We all, I think, agree that too many homes are empty. They can be a blight in communities and are a missed opportunity to increase the supply of safe, warm places that we call home. This is at a time when we need more homes right across Scotland. Homes become empty for a number of complex reasons. These privately owned homes are often inherited or transferred due to care needs. That can have an effect on how people are able to take action to return those homes back to use. And it's a sad fact that more homes will always become empty. And the key for all of us is to prevent that happening as much as we possibly can, and to support owners to return them to good use as people's homes. And we've been engaging extensively with a variety of stakeholders to help shape a draft vision and principles for housing in Scotland by 2040. And this, of course, includes the reduction in the number of privately owned empty homes. And I want to ensure that no homes are left empty for significant periods of time without good reason. And stakeholders also want to see better use of existing stock. And this came through strongly in their consultation responses to the committee. And of course, I want to maximise the number of homes that are occupied. However, it's equally important that we consider how these homes can also help us meet some of the other challenges that we face as a nation. A good example would be equipping them for the future by being more energy efficient and also being more adaptable. And to help achieve this, I'd like to see local authorities take a more strategic, joined-up approach, a view that I know is shared by many of you here in Parliament. And I'm very pleased that the Local Government and Communities Committee recognises the benefits of the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership approach, and that they share my view that local authorities are best placed to deliver change on the ground. Our role is to retain overall policy responsibility and national oversight, but delivery should also always be done at the local level. And as a government, we will continue to invest in the successful partnership approach. In April 2018, as Mr Dornan has already outlined, we doubled funding to the partnership to more than £400,000 per year, enabling an expansion of the service which is showing real results. We've seen 1,100 long-term empty homes brought back into use in 2018-19. A further 700 homes returned back to use in the first half of this year, which is, of course, an increase of supply of good quality homes at a rate of more than 100 per month. And over the course of the partnership, we have seen 5,000 homes returned back into use. What's the key to this success? Well, the resounding answer has to be the network of dedicated empty homes officers. More than 90% of these homes are directly attributable to them. And members of the committee will recall the evidence given by South Lanarkshire Council. Homeowners criticised them for their lack of dedicated support and advice. And I'm very pleased to announce that the Council have been working with the partnership to rectify this and will shortly be recruiting their own empty homes officer. And there are now 24 empty homes officers across Scotland, working in 21 local authorities. That, presiding officer, is good progress. However, I want to see an increase in the pace of recruitment. I'd like to see councils in the Lothians follow in Edinburgh's footsteps. I want warm discussions in Highland and in the Scottish borders to come to fruition. It's hard to believe, but we still have councils who do not consider empty homes a problem. These councils need... I'll give way to Mr Simpson.
Graham Simpson.
Can I thank the Minister for taking the intervention? Can he say if he's had any discussions with the councils who are point blank refusing to take on empty homes officers, and have they said why not?
Kevin Stewart.
I've talked to many councils over the last wee while, and I'll come into some of that in some depth in a wee while. I haven't spoken to every council on this issue, but I commit to Parliament today and to the committee that I will continue to endeavour to persuade all of these councils to do what is right, and that is to recruit empty homes officers. Vacancies also need to be filled quickly when they arise, and I recently met with Orkney Council, and I'm pleased to say that their post will soon be filled. Importantly, Dundee Council have also given assurance that their recruitment will shortly be proceeding. That was an award-winning service, and it has been without an officer for too long. And I would ask everyone to join me in encouraging local authorities to recognise the benefits of this approach and to bring empty homes officers to the communities that you and I serve. The partnership stands ready and waiting to develop bespoke solutions that work for your constituents and to work for housing in your areas. Great work is taking place across Scotland, but we cannot be complacent. It's widely acknowledged that there's no one-size-fits-all solution and no silver bullet. And we must ensure that local authorities are making the best use of the existing levers and that officers working on the ground have access to the right tools for the job. And that's why we ourselves are reviewing our empty homes policy. The evidence gathered during the committee's inquiry will usefully feed into this review and will inform our approach to housing to 2040. I'd like to touch on some of the issues Presiding Officer raised in the committee's report. There are concerns about the application of the Empty Homes Levy, and we've heard that again today from Mr Dornan. A lack of flexibility is often hindering homeowners who are trying to bring their homes back into use. These powers rightly lie with councils, and I've been very clear that they are intended to act as an incentive and not simply a revenue-raising tool. And I often cite examples of those with progressive policies, I think I should highlight Dumfries and Galloway Council for the efforts that they have made using levy monies and other monies to invest in their own town centre fund to bring housing in Dumfries town centre back into use. Other local authorities can follow suit. They should look at the example that is being set in Dumfries and follow accordingly, because this is good for all as far as I am concerned. I'll give way to Mr Finlay.
Neil Finlay.
Of course, it's not just residential properties that are a problem in town centres, it's commercial and shop fronts that are a problem as well. Is there inflexibility in the planning system to allow these properties to be brought back into residential use?
Kevin Stewart.
I don't think there is inflexibility in the planning system. Often local planning policies themselves do not take account of what is happening in particular communities. I'd be interested to hear from Mr Finlay in more depth about where he thinks there are difficulties in the areas that he represents. But quite frankly, I think that sometimes what we see in certain places, and I think maybe Dumfries is an example of that too, is that sometimes inflexibility has been built in. Somebody needs to come in and crack that, and that is what they are doing at this moment in time. I will take an intervention.
Very quickly, please, Annabel Ewing.
Minister for taking a brief intervention. Just returning to the issue of the empty homes and the council tax surcharge. It was clear in committee that concerns were raised that some councils don't even bother to go and inspect the situation on site, which, apart from being hugely discourteous actually to the individuals concerned, is really quite worrying in the general approach that is showing to fairness. Would the Minister care to comment on that?
Well, I agree with Ms Ewing that that is extremely discourteous, and I would say that these councils who are doing these kind of things are looking at this as a revenue-raising tool rather than what all of this was designed for, and that is what we need to change, and we need to encourage local authorities to do so. And I think if they took up the advice that's available from the Empty Homes Partnership, they can get this right. And we can see change in every part of the country.
Could you wind up in a minute or so, please, Minister?
I'm conscious, Presiding Officer, that I've taken a lot of interventions and there's a lot of areas to cover. If I could just cover one particular thing around about compulsory sale orders and compulsory purchase orders. I know that the planned compulsory sale orders are greatly anticipated. However, I have said that given the pressures that there are with Brexit and the legislative programme, there is very little parliamentary time to bring that forward, and we cannot do it within this parliamentary term. However, I remain committed to introducing compulsory sale orders for local authorities, and we're also committed to the long-term reform of the compulsory purchase order system. And we will bring through a package of proposals to show how we can address these issues, how authorities can assemble land, tackle problem properties and capture land value uplifts. And these will be ready for the next administration to consider legislating on early in the next Parliament. I will leave it at that, Presiding Officer. I will cover some of the other issues in my summing up, but I'd like to thank again the committee for the comprehensive inquiry that they undertook and the work that they have done on this extremely important issue.
Call Graham Simpson for around 9 minutes, please.
I'll do my best, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I start by also wishing you and other members a very happy New Year. It gives me great pleasure to kick off this first debate after recess for the Scottish Conservatives, but we have to be honest here, there is still a mountain of work still to do in this area before we get it right. Now, just before we trotted off for our festive break, we learned that the number of empty properties and second homes have increased to their second highest level since 2005. Latest figures show that in 2019 there were just over 65,000 second homes and empty properties. And if you strip out second homes, then the number of empty properties which have been empty for over 6 months stands, as it has done for a number of years, at around 40,000. So we're making very little impact on the number of properties that are not in use. And at a time when we have a homelessness crisis and young people struggling to get their foot on the housing ladder, that isn't good enough. Now, before I move on, can I also thank the clerks for their work in steering us through this important topic, as well as my fellow committee members, our very fair convener, James Dornan, his deputy, Sarah Boyack, Annabel Ewing, Andy Whiteman, Alexander Stewart, and of course my good friend Kenny Gibson. Now, why is this an important topic? Well, as the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership and Shelter said in their recent letter to the committee, investment in empty homes can prove an effective way to boost the local economy and support community regeneration. Bringing empty homes back into use can prove to be a sustainable way of increasing the housing stock across the country, benefiting the local community as a consequence. And empty homes work can help sustain fragile communities. Bringing them back into use is value for money. The average cost of renovating an empty property is between £6,000 and £25,000 compared to an estimated average of £120,000 to build a new home. I'm going to talk about the committee's inquiry and its report, but there were for me 2 key recommendations. The first is that every council should have a dedicated empty homes officer. We've heard about that already. And second, that the Scottish Government should meet its manifesto commitment to bring compulsory sale order powers forward this parliamentary session. Now, on the first, I can report, and we've heard about it already, a local success. South Lanarkshire Council came in for some criticism in our report. It was one of 11 councils not to have an empty homes officer. Another council in the area I represent, Falkirk, which is much smaller, has 2, and they're to be commended for that. Yes.
Kevin Stewart.
I too would commend Falkirk Council for the efforts that they've made, and I visited them recently in that regard. I think one of the things is that bringing in an empty homes officer can make a real difference very quickly. Murdo MacLeod is the new empty homes officer in the Western Isles, who's been in post for just a little over a year. He's brought 94 homes back into use in that very short period of time. Would Mr Simpson agree with me that others should look to the Western Isles, should look to South Lanarkshire and follow accordingly and do what's right for their communities and bringing blighted homes back into use?
Graham Simpson.
Yes, they should certainly look to the Western Isles, but perhaps not South Lanarkshire, but maybe Falkirk, who have been ahead of this. South Lanarkshire also stood out in our evidence taking as a council that took a hard line on applying the empty homes surcharge and was rightly criticised for this. Scottish Land and Estates expressed their frustration at the inconsistent way discretion was being applied to the levy. Its representative said that in a number of local authorities, people with empty homes with active repair plans, some of whom were waiting for building warrants from the council, have the 200% levy applied without any discussion, and in some cases without sending a representative from the council to visit the property, as Annabel Ewing said earlier. This was echoed by people from South Lanarkshire at an informal session we held, who said the council applied the levy rigidly without sending anyone out to see the properties. So that meant that those struggling with repairs were put in an even worse position. There was a sense that some councils were using the levy as a revenue-raising tool. So back to that local success. After our report was published, I commented in the local press, and I'll take some credit for it. South Lanarkshire is now looking to take on that empty homes officer, and that would be good if they do. And I also hope they reconsider their approach to the levy, because it's not helping. It's a council with a a very poor track record. There's an example in the area that I used to represent as a councillor in East Kilbride, where we have a house which has been boarded up, empty, it's fire damaged, it's been empty for about 10 years. And that's the kind of example that should be tackled. Kevin Stewart's response to our recommendation on compulsory sales orders was, I think, disappointing. Here's what we said. Given the strength of support for the development of CSO powers, the low uptake of CPO powers, and a manifesto commitment to bring CSO powers forward in the current parliamentary session, it's disappointing that draft proposals or legislation pertaining to CSO powers have not emerged. Whilst acknowledging the Minister's views on legislative priorities and the impact of Brexit, the committee recommends that the Scottish Government brings forward strong proposals for the introduction of these powers and fulfils its manifesto commitment to bring them forward in this parliamentary session. And we went on, in view of the commonly cited issues associated with CPOs, the committee would welcome an update from the Scottish Government on the development of CSO powers and how it will ensure that CSOs are less complicated, less resource intensive and less financially risky for councils to use as an alternative to CPOs. Now, the Minister only responded to that last point, and his response was sadly rather woolly. He said this: "We'll bring forward a package of proposals that addresses how authorities can assemble land, tackle problem properties and capture land value uplift, ready for the next administration to consider legislating on these matters. This requires careful consideration and will keep the committee updated as this work progresses." Now, note the lack of any real timescale there. It's not what we asked for, and perhaps the Minister can flesh this out when he closes. It could be game-changing as far as getting empty homes back into use is concerned. I can see the issues, and I can see how it could be controversial, but so long as there are checks and balances built into legislation, then councils should not be able to get ahead of themselves and order everyone to sell up. There are lots of reasons why homes are empty, as we heard. We deliberately did not look at second or holiday homes. An owner could be in hospital or in prison or abroad for a long period, or mentally incapable and unable to sell. It's a complex issue. It requires different solutions. And that's why the work of the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership is so important. That's why having empty homes officers in every council matters. And that's why giving councils more powers to use with discretion and wisely matters. Now, others will focus on other parts of the report, and I look forward to hearing their contributions. Thank you.
And I call Pauline McNeill for around 8 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll join with others and wish you all a Happy New Year. It still is the 7th of January. It still feels a bit like a new year to me so far anyway. Congratulations to the Local Government and Communities Committee for an excellent report on empty homes in Scotland, an excellent piece of work. To bring 40,000 homes back into use, as Graham Simpson has just said, would be a game changer. But the issue, of course, is much wider than this. Empty homes are often an indicator of decline, helping to drag neighbourhoods down, particularly when they fall into disrepair. I say allowed to fall into disrepair because in many cases, as already highlighted, owners are simply struggling to find the time and the resources to act. But I would also like to pay tribute to the work of Andy Whiteman, a member of the committee, who has written on this subject, and I quote from his report in 2018 where he says, "It is apparent that the greatest number of empty homes can be found in areas of high multiple social and economic deprivation," and the committee have highlighted this important point too. The report also clearly and helpfully sets out the reasons why we have so many empty homes, and they are diverse reasons. And it's worth noting, as the committee says, that there's a very human element to the reasons why we have empty homes. Depopulation, market decline, bereavement all play a part in why a person does not want to sell a property, because they may have an emotional attachment, can be a factor too. Legal issues are where an owner has had plans to renovate a property but suffered the loss of their employment unexpectedly. Homes over shops seems to be a particular problem requiring a particular solution. And perhaps the Minister might be able to address that in closing. Rural areas, as we know, face acute and specific challenges with historic decline in population, particularly where there might be a shortage of jobs affecting the vibrancy of those communities. So we can see that there are huge connections with empty homes and the vibrancy of communities themselves. I would also like to put on record my thanks to the work of the Empty Homes Partnership and, as been referred to, the Empty Homes officers who have helped to bring back 4,000 homes into use over the last decade. I think there's a consensus that these officers are absolutely key to bringing more homes back into use. Not simply because they manage the empty homes in local authorities, but they are excellently placed to use their knowledge and their local housing environment market and the market to establish good relationships with local developers, solicitors and property owners in a wholesome way that allows them to help to make decisions about how we can bring homes back into use. The report also appears to be very positive about the use of officers, empty homes officers, and it shows that there's more positive experiences. And we've heard from the Minister that we have 21 local authorities, perhaps thanks to Graham Simpson, we now have 22 local authorities with officers. It's quite clear to me that, having read the report and listened to the debate, this is a critical aspect of making a bigger difference. We do need more local authorities to ensure the ones that haven't done so continue to make an appointment as such. Of course, there is a housing context, so the plan is over 130,000. Probably a lot more people are waiting on lists for a home in the country already is existing in a housing crisis where homelessness is on the rise. So local authorities are the key driver and they must be adequately resourced to carry this role out. They are the lifeblood of regeneration. I'd be delighted to give way.
Kevin Stewart.
Ms McNeill has mentioned resources there. My argument, the argument of the partnership and many other stakeholders is that by employing an empty homes officer, local authorities are actually going to make a saving, big savings in some cases, and are going to bring in more income by bringing these properties back into use.
Pauline McNeill.
I think that's a very valid point. I would be interested to know why the other local authorities haven't made such an appointment. Perhaps that's a case that needs to be made to them too, because it's quite clear that throughout the report that it's the connection between empty homes and the regeneration of those communities which becomes such a vital and important aspect of the work. And so bringing empty homes back into use is obviously much wider. I did actually find it useful to read the committee report when they did their various visits, particularly to New Milns, where I know that they spoke to a couple who had inherited a home in the area but had trouble selling it. Also, they spoke to an owner in South Ayrshire who had a home but it was unoccupied because the flat above had for 4 years serious recurring issues with water ingress, making it uninhabitable. And this is a point made well by Graham Simpson, which is they were charged the council tax empty property levy, and indicates that there does need to be a rethink around this policy because clearly they had a problem that had to be overcome. A property in many cases can be an asset, but it can also be a burden, and owners need the assistance of the experts within local authorities to be able to manage themselves out of those types of problems. So we see the human element of empty homes. The council tax levy is obviously a crucial tool in the box, but it must be used for the purpose for which it was intended. We need a more consistent approach when it comes to the application of the council tax levy. And this is something that councils can apply with some discretion, but their current approach doesn't seem to bear out some consistency, and it may be deterring investment in empty properties. In fact, it was the Scottish Lands and Estates that briefed the members for the debate have reported that some of the members have expressed concern that whilst the owners have ongoing repair plans, I think, Graham Simpson, you made this point too, that the 200% council tax levy was applied without any discussion. I'm at a loss to understand why any local authority would think that that would be acceptable, and perhaps more work needs to be done to local authorities to make it clear that that levy is there to help bring homes back into use and is not a revenue-raising power. Obviously not every local authority, but some. So it seems to lack some common sense. Lastly, I just want to turn to the issue of compulsory purchase orders, which I think are a central tool in the regeneration of communities. And I know this government in the last parliamentary term, which I wasn't part of, had a specific act on regenerating communities with additional powers. I thought it was a good piece. It's called the Community Regeneration Act or something like that. But what's very disappointing is, despite that commitment and a commitment in the manifesto this time round, we're hearing that we probably won't see that in this parliamentary term, and also a point made by Graham Simpson, possibly not. We don't know what point in the next administration. Using a compulsory purchase order is obviously a significant legal issue for authorities, and rightly so. There should be a high test if you're going to mandatorily remove property from an owner. However, at present, it seems that that test is too difficult or too expensive. There are clear blockages to the use of this tool. Somebody wanted to intervene? Yes, I'll take
James Dornan.
For taking the intervention, but will the member accept that the evidence that we got from some of the local authorities was that it's not really as complicated as some of the other local authorities made out, and very often it's just the fear of taking them to court that seems to be what's causing the problem here.
Pauline McNeill.
Yes, I did note that the member made that specific point in your opening remarks, that local authorities feared that there would be adverse risk going through a legal process. I have some experience in my own constituency in Glasgow, where not only is a high test for obvious reasons, particularly when you're regenerating communities, and there's maybe a split decision in the community. Can be quite controversial. I'm happy to, yes.
Kevin Stewart.
Glasgow is actually a good example of an authority that is doing very well with CPOs, with an increase in the amount of CPOs being brought forward. And they are working well with developers and with RSLs back to ensure that compulsory purchase orders are brought forward. I understand, and I haven't got this as fact, but I have been told that they now have a dedicated solicitor to deal with CPOs. I think that others should follow suit. Does Ms McNeill agree?
Pauline McNeill.
I do agree that local authorities do require probably legal expertise in order to inform them and perhaps talk them through the risks involved that might not be as adverse as they think they are. I conclude on this, Presiding Officer. I know that the Minister last September confirmed that there had only been 9 in total over 3 years, is the figures that I had. It seems rather low. So notwithstanding that there are possibly misapprehensions or misunderstandings about the use of compulsory purchase orders, and of course compulsory sale orders as a good alternative to CPOs are also very important. But I do think possibly this term is going to see itself out before you get a chance to legislate. I think it's a bit disappointing because it is such an important tool in the box. Thank you.
Now call Andy Whiteman for a generous 6 minutes, I think.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Was that a short 6 minutes you were requesting? No? Generous 6 minutes. Excellent. Okay, thanks very much indeed, and thanks to colleagues who've already spoken. I think the work we did in the committee provided quite a fascinating insight into a problem that continues to bedevil Scotland. And I was particularly pleased to hear in some detail about and pay attention in some detail to the work of the Empty Homes Partnership, who've done some vital work in this area. And as other members have said, of course, given the housing crisis we're facing, people with no homes, people paying too much for housing, people living in unsuitable accommodation, the extent of second home ownership, the rise of unlawful short-term letting, we should all, of course, be seeking to use our existing housing stock as efficiently as possible, and that includes empty homes. I note from homelessness stats that in 2019 there were 36,465 homeless applications made across Scotland, and 29,894 households were assessed as homeless. And that equates to a household losing their home every 17 minutes. And there are more than enough empty homes to meet the housing needs of those families. Of course, they won't always be matched. And I note, I think Kevin Stewart mentioned 1,128 empty homes brought into use last year. But of course, we've had a 33% increase in the number of empty homes since 2016. And at this rate, it will be 35 years before they're all brought into use. I was also particularly intrigued to read Shelter Scotland's Empty Homes Value report last year, because I think that manages to highlight very well the range of benefits that accrue if we make better use of our housing stock, and includes a useful overview of the costs and benefits associated with taking action. And as other members have said, there are many reasons why houses lie empty, and as our convener James Dornan mentioned, hearing direct testimony from homeowners as well as case studies from professionals was particularly illuminating. And as other members have said, of course, it's clear from evidence we took that there's a real value in having dedicated empty homes officers in councils, and I agree all councils should have such a function, although I do think it's important not to get hung up on job titles. There are some councils who are doing this work, but they're not called empty homes officers. The council tax has been raised as well, and we paid some attention to this. And I think our investigations revealed mixed views on the powers that were available to local councils to vary the level of council tax. So providing a discount is intended, as the Minister and others have said, to bring homes back into use. And we heard widespread criticism of the way this levy is being applied in ways that didn't take account of individual circumstances, although we also heard from people like Perth and Kinross who did recognise the varying circumstances. And I welcome the Minister's commitment to review how the guidance in relation to this is working in a year's time. Although ultimately I take the view that council tax is a tax base that belongs to local government, and neither this Parliament nor ministers should be interfering in the freedom of councils, either to set the tax rate as they see fit or to implement statutory variance powers. And it's interesting, I think Neil Findlay mentioned in his intervention about non-domestic properties. Councils can increase council tax on empty homes by up to 200%, but the owners of empty listed buildings or derelict land with no buildings pay no rates at all. No rates are paid if the owner is a trustee or a company of a company that's been wound up. Owners of long-term empty properties, non-domestic properties, enjoy a 10% reduction in rates, and that seems very disproportionate in relationship between the non-domestic sector and the domestic sector. Now, I will briefly... Yeah,
Neil Findlay.
Well, on this subject, I'm just wondering if he thinks there are any planning barriers to these commercial properties coming back into residential use.
Andy Whiteman.
Neil Findlay for the intervention, because it did remind me that I asked the Minister during evidence in the committee about the town centre review, and I think he committed to go and look at it again. That was conducted, I think, in 2013 by Malcolm Fraser and others, and Pauline McNeill mentioned this too. In fact, one of the problems he identified was the fact that in law there's a 20-year limit on residential leases, and a lot of commercial owners of property happily lease the commercial property, but would like to lease the shops above the property above the shops and businesses for residential, but they want to do it for longer than 20 years, and they're prohibited in law from doing that. And so I think it's time again to look at that legal limitation. Other powers have been mentioned: compulsory purchase and sale orders. I was intrigued that the Minister told us in committee that 13 empty homes have been purchased using CPOs. This is welcome, and I think there's a widespread understanding that this could be much, much greater. I want to briefly mention compulsory sale orders, because this was a recommendation of the Land Reform Review Group in 2014. The government consulted on compulsory sale orders in the summer of 2015, and in their manifesto they committed to, and I quote, bring forward proposals to modernise and improve powers for compulsory sales orders as part of its 2016 manifesto. Now, it's disappointing that the Minister's dropped this. Now, he said in committee that this was due to pressures of Brexit in government and government time. He said in his remarks in this debate it was due to a lack of parliamentary time. Now, I can't comment on the timescales. Well, I'd just like to complete my point, and then maybe the intervention would be more meaningful. I can't comment on the lack of time within government. That's a matter for government. There's no lack of parliamentary time. We've got a 5-year session here. And, of course, the manifesto commitment was to bring forward proposals, not necessarily to bring forward legislation. So what I, and I think other members of the committee, would be keen to see in this parliamentary session is bringing forward the proposals. And I suppose we'll be quite relaxed, perhaps, if the legislation follows in subsequent years. I'll take the intervention.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There is no lack of will on the part of the government to change this situation, but there is very much a lack of time and a lack of resource, because civil servants and others have been working very hard on Brexit and other matters, and there this, as Mr Whiteman is well aware of more than many others, is a particularly complex piece of law. It means unpicking mid-19th century legislation to ensure that you get the CPO and CSO powers absolutely right. Now, I'm quite sure that no one in this place wants to put forward a piece of legislation that is not going to work. This is a complex piece that would require time. There's no lack of will, but there is a lack of time.
Andy Whiteman.
The lack of government time, and I'm not seeking legislation this session. I think what we'd like to see is a paper outlining what the proposals are, what exactly the problems that have been identified are within government. That would be useful to us so that we can interrogate them, and I would encourage the Minister to do that before this session is over. To conclude, Presiding Officer, the inquiry deliberately didn't look at second homes, although, as we know, the impact of second homes on local markets is a long-standing issue in rural areas and indeed in some other urban areas as well. And in my view, in our view, all second homes should be subject to planning consent. So finally, and just to conclude, I think more fundamentally in this question, we need to reorientate how we conceptualise housing. It's in the public interest to make sure that there's investment in the long term, well beyond the period of occupancy or ownership of anyone's private interest. And this, I think such a perspective lies at the root of issues that were seen during our work on the maintenance of tenements. Housing's not simply private property, it's part of public infrastructure. And I think when we see it in that light, we might eventually sort the problem of empty homes. Thanks, Presiding Officer.
We'll move now to the open debate. I have been generous with interventions in the opening speeches. We've got a little time left, but nothing too lengthy. Thank you. We have Kenneth Gibson, followed by Tom Mason. 6-minute speeches, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all see empty homes in our communities, houses sometimes lying empty for months or even years on end. The Local Government and Communities Committee set out to discover how many homes are empty in Scotland and the reasons why, and collegiately worked together in a collaborative way to realise the answers. It's deeply frustrating that while people are homeless in Scotland, tens of thousands of homes lie empty and unused. Changes in the law that allowed councils to increase council tax in certain types of empty properties do not appear to have helped in many local authority areas, of which more later. The impact on neighbouring homes can also be significant. Just one empty home can bring down the overall image of an area and make other properties harder to sell. Such a problem grows when more and more homes in an area are empty. According to recent figures, as outlined in a report, 83,435 of 2.62 million homes in Scotland lie empty, and of that, 39,110 have been empty for 6 months and 24,471 for 12 months or more. The problem is particularly bad in parts of rural and island Scotland, with 5.8% of homes in West Anna, my own constituency, lying empty, for example. As this is a problem for all of Scotland, it's in everyone's interest to resolve it. Before we can deliver solutions, it's best to try and understand why we have empty homes. And this has been touched on already by a number of members. An obvious reason is bereavement. Perhaps someone has passed away and their family is too attached to the property to sell it, or there is no family. The property owner may be unwell, in hospital, a care home. They could be abroad for long periods of time, or in prison. And therefore cannot physically do anything about their house lying empty. Clearly, for such varied and complicated problems, there can be no simple answer. And James Dornan, I believe, said it best when he said there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The SNP government has funded the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership since 2010 through Shelter Scotland, and during evidence to committee, the Minister confirmed that the government had recently doubled funding for the partnership to more than £400,000 a year until 2021. This initiative certainly gives advice to homeowners and works with councils to develop empty home services that help put empty private sector homes into use. It also provides training services and guidance for empty homes officers, support for local projects, bringing empty homes back into use, and support for councils to develop empty homes strategies. Over the course of the inquiry, many witnesses commented on the valuable work carried out by the partnership and the high quality of advice, guidance and workshops provided to the officers. And one of our recommendations is, of course, that every council in Scotland should have empty homes officers responsible for identifying empty houses in their areas and bringing them back into use. And as we've heard, 24 of Scotland's 32 councils currently have empty homes officers, and I hope by the end of the year all will have done so. And I think any local authority listening today that doesn't will find out that the evidence being presented today and in the report is compelling on that matter. The committee heard first-hand evidence from people who had direct support from empty homes officers, and most stressed the benefits that can be brought not only to those with an empty home, but also in dealing with and acting as a go-between for other departments of the council, solicitors and bodies such as community regeneration organisations, and the Minister outlined their success in returning empty homes to habitation. Let me expand a little on the issue of council tax. In the Empty Homes report, it says that some empty homes are in fact exempt from paying council tax. For example, if the owner has to go away for long-term health care or the house has been legally repossessed by a mortgage lender. On homes that would normally need to pay council tax, those unfurnished or unoccupied, there is a 6-month exemption from paying tax. If the house remains empty for a period of 6 to 12 months, local authorities may offer a discount on tax between 10 and 50%. This extra revenue must then be used by the authority to support provision of new housing. And since 2013, local authorities have also deferred to remove the discount or charge a council tax increase of up to 100% for certain properties lying empty for 12 months or more, known as a council tax levy. If the owner is attempting to sell the property, the surcharge can only be applied for after 24 months, and this extra money can then be dedicated to whatever project the local authority wants, not just new housing. However, some authorities that did not have an empty homes officer were taking a blanket approach, as colleagues have mentioned, to the application of this levy and immediately charged it as soon as a property had been empty for 12 months, in some cases with no discussion or no council representative sent to assess the situation. This has caused considerable distress to those struggling to refurbish but are being hampered by this additional taxation. Empty home owners who gave evidence echoed this. They explained that the levy had automatically been applied to their homes and they were struggling to complete repairs on the empty property so it could be habitable while also trying to pay the council tax bill. Surely councils should be more flexible when it comes to such varied and complicated individual cases rather than automatically apply double taxation. The Scottish Government certainly has much to consider following the findings and recommendations of a report, and one committee that committee members are all disappointed about, and we've already heard about it today, is the fact that we are not progressing compulsory sales orders, an admittedly complex matter that one could certainly bring many homes and buildings back into productive use. And I'm glad that the Minister has made a personal commitment, reiterated again today, to actually this legislation. But as colleagues have mentioned, I believe it is possible that proposals at least should be brought forward within this Parliament. If we are talking about legislation and the time being taken up by civil servants, I can certainly think of some legislation that I think this should be prioritised over that's actually going forward at the moment. Presiding Officer, the Minister's response today was overall encouraging, and one of the things he focused on was the need for continued partnership working. And this November, a year after the report was published, committees and I look forward to discussing with the Minister how things have improved since the report and what more can and will be done in light of those improvements.
Tom Mason, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have to first of all declare an interest as an Aberdeen City Councillor. Presiding Officer, it is a pleasure to contribute to this debate, as the solution to the empty homes is such an important issue to help us improve the housing situation in Scotland. The report recently issued by the Local Government and Communities Committee has given a good insight into the current situation. It gives two very clear recommendations. That each local authority should have a dedicated empty homes officer, at least one, and that the Scottish Government should meet its manifesto commitment to bring compulsory sales powers forward into this parliamentary session. I live in hope. The report recognises very clearly that each empty home has a unique set of circumstances. Each needs to be handled individually to break any logjam which occurs to interrupt the reoccupation of many properties, both private and public. I will not repeat the statistics, many of which have been outlined by Graham Simpson and other members. However, I would like to elaborate on a number of issues familiar to me and examples of why the current recommendations are pertinent to the current housing issues. One example which typifies the complex situation that can occur is a block of 1970s apartments in central Aberdeen. It is in an area which, while not the best in Aberdeen, certainly is not the worst. It is in an area with good landscaping, green areas and some trees. The immediate area consists of 3- and 4-storey apartment blocks and some 2-storey semi-detached dwellings from around the same time frame. Being in the centre of Aberdeen, it is, however, prone to habitation by many single residents, students, temporary residents, and often subject to vandalism, drug and alcoholic culture. The block itself consists of 6 relatively well-maintained 2-room apartments. 4 of the flats were purchased quite sensibly under the right to buy, as they represented a good proposition and were then in relatively good condition. Regrettably now, 3 of the flats are empty and have been so for some time. On the top floor, there remains 1 private occupant and 1 of the 2 council flats. On the middle floor is a further council tenant who is described by the remaining residents as the neighbour from hell. Parties, drug taking and dealing, excessive noise all through the night, smells, debris on the landings, damage to the front doors and repeated fire emergencies. These disruptions have been going on for months, despite protests to the council by other occupants. The disruption in the block and the surrounding area culture has led to all but 1 of the private tenants leaving the block. They hope to sell the properties or at the very least rent them, but such is the situation with the neighbour and the reputation of the address, they have been unsuccessful finding either tenants or purchasers. They have just simply had to walk away. So the 3 potential city centre homes lie vacant, unused, unsuitable. Obviously, the current economic situation for housing in the city is a contributing factor, but the disruptive neighbour is undoubtedly a major factor in this situation. It is clear, as the committee report says, that this situation has its own unique set of circumstances and can only be resolved with a lot of individual attention, use of the correct powers available to the housing officers. It is certainly undesirable that such properties remain empty given their quality and situation. Now, in the North East, it is not surprising that there are many empty properties waiting for sale, as workers have found it necessary to move away from Aberdeen because of the oil downturn. As members may well know, until recently, property prices in the North East were excessively high, and a major readjustment has been taking place. The previous high prices have encouraged many new developments, and these developments are still being built. In fact, many remain only partially completed. In order to survive, the developers are drip-feeding properties into the market 1 by 1. So older properties for sale are competing with new properties with their many advantages and incentives. Existing properties remain available for sale, unoccupied for many months for their owners or buy-to-let landlords try to move on. Unfortunately, this situation shows no signs of abating. Affordable social housing built as part of these new developments is similarly involved. This new affordable housing is by far more attractive than older social housing. Potential tenants decline older accommodation or those in remote and difficult locations in favour of the new properties, leaving the older ones empty. Properties in the North East which are remote and have poor transportation connections, which get poorer as the transport infrastructure gets poor and more declining, are also underoccupied. Individual identification of problems in each case is required. It is vital for empty property officers to be in place and have the right tools available to assist them to deal with each case. Finally, presiding officer, there is an issue regarding permanent second homes. Here I have no care and interest. I have a small share in an old wooden cottage near Nairn. In some areas, second homes do affect the local housing availability as they inflate the market. In other areas, they are rented out regularly to tourists as an essential part of tourism infrastructure and provide opportunity for Scottish tourism rather than overseas carbon-expensive holidays. In many cases, second home owners have provided capital for the reconstruction of isolated properties which are inconvenient, remote and not suitable for modern residents. Here, quite rightly, tools should be available for local authorities to make their own decisions within their areas as to how these properties are dealt with. Presiding officer, there are significant issues that remain when dealing with the problem of empty homes. However, with the committee's report, its recommendations and the political will, we can make the changes needed to improve the situation across Scotland. Thank you.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to have been called to speak in this debate this afternoon on the Local Government Committee's recent report on empty homes in Scotland. And the report published on the 10th of November of last year followed, as we've heard, a number of very useful evidence sessions with relevant stakeholders, with affected property owners and indeed with the Minister himself. And the report highlights the key issues that emerged from those evidence sessions. And before turning to a few of those, which I can do in the time available today, I would also wish at the outset to thank the committee clerks and indeed Spice for the excellent support and research that they provided. The first key issue that emerged is that we have no way of knowing with any exactitude the scale of the problem, with figures varying as between some 64,000 to some 83,000 empty properties in Scotland. And this results from the fact that neither of the main sources of data on empty homes in Scotland provide an accurate reflection of the position. Whilst on the one hand, the data emerging from the National Records of Scotland almost certainly inflates the scale of the problem, as the data collected includes unoccupied new builds and dwellings awaiting demolition. The data collected, on the other hand, by the Scottish Government almost certainly underrepresents the scale of the problem. Indeed, the data it collects is linked to how each local authority reports empty properties as per the local council tax records. And of course, that varies per authority and does not include in any event undeclared empty properties. This lack of accurate data is far from satisfactory, and I'm pleased indeed to note that the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership, which of course is funded by the Scottish Government, is working with the Scottish Government and independent researchers to undertake a geographic information system mapping exercise of empty homes right across Scotland. And this will go a considerable way, when completed, to providing a more accurate picture of the number of empty homes involved. And that, of course, would be vital to ensure that we can then tailor the solutions to meet the needs of each local area. Another key issue that emerged is the way in which some local authorities are deploying the council tax levy, and we have heard about that already this afternoon. And this levy, which was introduced in 2013, allows local authorities not only to remove the empty property reliefs available, but also to charge a council tax increase of up to 100% for certain properties which have been empty for 12 months or more. Whilst this was supposed to have been a tool to incentivise the bringing of empty homes back into use, rather what we have seen in the case of some local authorities is the recourse to this, what I would call surcharge, as a revenue-raising instrument, pure and simple. It is clear from the evidence that the committee took that indeed some local authorities simply apply a blanket approach to the deployment of the council tax levy, immediately proceeding to the 100% levy at the 12-month cut-off point, rather than using some discretion and flexibility and indeed perhaps common sense, which was in fact what was directed in the applicable Scottish guidance available. Indeed, in some cases, as I have highlighted in an intervention to the Minister this afternoon, local authorities concerned do not even bother to arrange for any on-site inspection to determine on the ground if works are in fact progressing and in what way they're progressing and if active interventions are being made to move matters on. And it is difficult to understand how such an unfair bureaucratic approach could ever be justified. And moreover, such an approach is in any event entirely counterproductive, as it impacts negatively on the ability of householders to complete outstanding works and thereby to shorten delays. And otherwise can lead indeed to indefinite delays in getting the empty house back into use as money dries up and they go round in a ghastly spiral of further debt, with no money at all being available to continue the works to upgrade the property. The Minister indicated, certainly...
Graham Simpson.
Annabel Ewing for taking the intervention. Would she perhaps agree with me that councils should have to visit or at least engage with property owners before applying this levy?
Annabel Ewing.
I think it would be very difficult to understand why they would not, and perhaps this could be a matter for each chief executive of each local authority in Scotland to set the record straight on how they will now approach the matter with fairness at the heart of their approach. I'm pleased to note the Minister in his response to my intervention this afternoon, as he has, in fact, to be fair, done already, indicated that he very much understands the problems here and that he has encouraged once again local authorities to sharpen up their act here, and I do hope that he will undertake to keep the pressure up. The last issue that I can raise in the time available concerns the important issue of appointing dedicated empty homes officers, and we've heard a lot about that this afternoon, and how the appointment of such dedicated empty homes officers can indeed make a key difference. It's not simply a case of rebadging an existing role, it's actually creating the role that then works out of the silo, but works rather with officials from building standards, officials from legal, officials from environmental health, officials from town centre regeneration. And that is the key difference. And therefore, it is absolutely vital that each local authority now goes ahead and appoints the empty homes officer working in partnership with the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership. And I'm pleased to note that the committee indeed called upon every local authority to do that very thing. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I would wish to say that the problem of empty homes is sadly a fact of life across Scotland, both urban and rural. It is a wasted asset apart from any other consideration, and in my own constituency of Cowdenbeath, one can quite clearly see the negative impact, the blight on high streets, the problems for neighbours living next to an empty property, and so on. And of course, the reasons for empty homes are, very varied. We've heard that, but it is quite clear that from the committee's report that if we start to take the actions that we have identified in the report, and if the recommendations that we have made in committee are duly taken on board, and I think we can really start to see a major decrease in the number of empty homes that we see in Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I call Neil Finlay to be followed by Alistair Allen. Mr Finlay, please.
Walking from the Waverley Station to this building every day, or visiting some of our towns and cities over the Christmas period, I was increasingly struck by the extent and human impact of homelessness. We see increasing numbers of people sleeping on the streets, their fellow human beings reduced to sleeping in cardboard boxes or pallets in the depths of winter, with all the implications that has for their health and well-being, and the implications it has for our society, our economy, and indeed our communities and the cohesion of them. We cannot claim to be a civilised country when we tolerate someone being made homeless every 17 or 18 minutes, over 36 children a day with no home. We see landlords and hotel owners making significant money out of the provision of temporary accommodation, many providing a room with no cooking facilities for residents other than a kettle. And these properties are always full, such is the demand placed upon Scotland's councils. Homelessness is a profitable business for them. 2.25 million was spent in temporary accommodation in West Lothian alone last year. And of course these providers provide, yes, an immediate stick-and-plaster solution, but they suck huge amounts of money out of the system with no long-term benefit. In Glasgow, we see Shelter the Housing Charity forced to take a 4-page advert in the Herald newspaper to highlight their impending legal action against the City Council's failure to house homeless people. An unprecedented act for a national charity. What a dreadful situation that is. And across Scotland, as others have mentioned, in some of the tourist hotspots like this city, parts of Fife, the Highlands and Islands, we see local people unable to buy or rent a home as the Airbnb and holiday let market drives up prices and takes housing stock out of the reach of local people. It's now an astonishing £253,000 is the average cost of a house in Edinburgh. That is way out of the reach of most working people by a very long way. It was a huge mistake when this Parliament failed to take action on this during the planning bill. On our high streets and in some industrial estates, we see towns blighted by a combination of empty homes, empty shops and units. So on the one hand, we have empty properties of various type. On the other hand, we have homeless people sleeping in doorways. Surely we can find the wherewithal to bring these two issues together to address the economic blight and the housing crisis. But to do so needs real financial and political commitment. Now, the committee report identifies some good practice and the good work of empty homes officers, and I commend these public servants for the progress made, but we cannot expect councils to take on staff and new responsibilities whilst budgets are cut year on year. And I know the Minister says the budget for this initiative has increased. But if you appoint an empty homes officer who inevitably, wait till I finish my point, Minister, wait till I finish my point. If you appoint an empty homes officer to a local authority, they inevitably have to liaise with many departments within the council, many officials. If you speak to council officers across the piece, They have lost so many staff in different departments that they're operating on a shoestring. They will tell you that if you go and speak to the Minister.
Minister.
Mr Finlay heard me saying earlier on, Presiding Officer, that many folks have said that employing empty homes officers make massive savings to councils. They deal with a huge amount of problems that can exist if an empty home exists within a community. The disappointing thing for me is the fact that some local authorities choose not to listen to others who have got the good news going on in their places. One of those local authorities that has failed thus far to appoint an empty homes officer is West Lothian Council. I hope that they will follow Edinburgh's recent road to Damascus conversion in appointing empty homes officers, and I hope that the other Lothian councils will follow. I think that what they can do is bring a sense of reality to what is required.
Thank you. I'll give you your time back. That was a long intervention.
The same applies to enforcement officers within planning departments. If we look, many cannot enforce conditions on abandoned or derelict properties or take forward legal action or CPO because they either don't have the personnel or they don't have the cash to do so. I know that from my own area and my caseload, my constituency caseload. You can shake your head all you like, but I can tell you, well, I'll tell you this, Minister, why don't you come with me to meet the local authority and we'll discuss the resourcing issues, that mean that they can't prosecute and take forward these enforcement cases. That's an open invitation to you, Minister.
I'd be quite happy.
Yes, and Minister, don't appeal to me for interventions. It's the member you ask.
Presiding Officer, I'm always happy to meet local authorities. One of the difficulties I have is in visiting West Lothian because they often will not allow ministers to visit various projects in their area. I hope that Mr Finlay can maybe persuade them to change their mind on that front too.
Scraping the barrel now, Minister.
No,
scraping
I'm not.
The barrel now. Presiding Officer, I know the motivation behind this report is a desire to provide more homes, and I want to see councils and housing organisations look innovatively at how we provide more housing. I think we should be repopulating town centres. I think we should be looking at using empty commercial properties and retail properties and bringing them into the residential property sector. Again, this would give an economic boost to areas affected, and it would provide new, interesting and vibrant residential spaces. What's the point of leaving properties to decline over time just because they've been allocated to a commercial or retail use in the local plan? The Minister said there are no planning barriers to doing this, so why are there so many of these commercial and retail properties empty in our high streets? We see in some of our bigger towns like Livingston huge industrial units lying empty for years, lying empty, when with some imagination and development they could be developed into new and exciting living spaces. None of this can be done without money, of course, and without taking risks, but I think the reward could be great. And I want to stress that I'm not advocating a planning free-for-all or houses being thrown up anywhere. They have to be in the right place. But we have to look innovatively at how we provide homes for all. Finally, Presiding Officer, I welcome the report, but we really need a much more bold approach if we are to address the pressing housing needs across the entire country.
Thank you very much. And can I remind members not to use the term you when speaking to each other? I fight this in vain, I know, but the only you sitting here is moi. I now call Alistair Allen to be followed by Jeremy Balfour. Mr Allen, please.
Presiding Officer, Happy New Year. In the islands, as in many other parts of the country, housing represents a major challenge for many communities. Bringing empty homes back into use is a significant part of dealing with that, and the committee report is also a very welcome addition to that debate. I want to say something briefly first about the context in the islands and why bringing empty homes into use there has a particular importance. Firstly, and I make no apology for stressing this seemingly obvious fact, if you get a job in the Western Isles, you can't commute there daily from somewhere else. What's perhaps less obvious to many people, unless they've looked at the map, is that if you get a job at one end of my constituency, you can't commute every day from there to the other end of my constituency. The shortage of affordable houses across the islands therefore has both a social and an economic consequence. In a part of Scotland where good jobs regularly go unfilled after being advertised, a reason given by many employers for that is the lack of affordable places for people to live. Many people are amazed to discover that there are in fact nearly 600 people on the waiting list for HHP, that is the Western Isles Only Housing Association, which inherited all the council's former housing stock. And of those, around 450 are new applicants. The Scottish Government has made a very important offer to HHP and to the Corga, £25 million to invest in new rented housing if that money can be spent by next year. And the biggest challenge for all involved will be ensuring that this money benefits housing projects in rural areas as well as in the town of Stornoway. And while there is an admitted tendency towards urbanisation even within the islands, part of that is driven by lack of supply in the rural areas historically, as much as it is by demand. Now, addressing that means continuing to be brave in rural Scotland more generally about building houses in areas where there is no recorded demand for them. That's because you can't record the demand for affordable rented houses in areas where there have been no such houses for people to apply for. The Scottish Government's support for the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership also seeks to address some of these very issues. Practical support has included providing an advice service for the owners of empty homes and for affected communities to bring empty homes back into use. Now, there are just over 500 empty homes in the Western Isles which have been uninhabited for 6 months or more. 8.3% of dwellings in the islands were vacant in 2017, compared with the Scottish average of 3.1%. Now, the similarity between the number of empty houses and the number of people waiting for a house is probably coincidental, and nobody pretends that all of these houses are fit to be brought back into use. But many can, and the sooner a house can be used, the less chance there is of it falling into a ruinous condition. Now, the Minister has rather beaten me to this point, but I'll make it nonetheless, which is that it is worth recognising, as he rightly has done, the work that's been done by the local authority, Corlin and Yeran Shear, in all of this. I want to recognise in particular, as he has, the work done by one local government officer, Murdo MacLeod, who, as the Empty Homes Officer within the Council, has been given the outstanding individual title at the Howdens Scottish Empty Homes Champions of the Year. Mr MacLeod is the first person to hold the post for the Corga and has far exceeded expectations, with 61 properties being brought back into use in only 12 months. Yep.
Minister.
I don't want to really correct you, but my latest figures show that Mr MacLeod has brought 94 properties in the islands back into use. A third more than Dr Allen has said, and I think Mr MacLeod deserves the plaudits for that figure.
He certainly does, and I'm more than prepared to go with the Minister's figure rather than the one I had. The Empty Homes officers in the islands, officer in the islands has traced the owners of many of these houses to find out what their intentions were. And I understand, if my figures on this are correct, that around 60% of them live in the Outer Hebrides. Indeed, nationally, since 2010, the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership has continued to bring an increasing number of privately owned homes back into use, with almost 700 being brought back into use in the past 6 months alone. Presiding Officer, can I conclude by mentioning one other thing that's relevant to this, however, and that is that there is going to be a need for intervention on housing on a range of fronts in the islands. This Parliament is giving local authorities new powers, I hope, to place limits on certain areas being used for short-term lets. This was a problem rightly raised by Mr Finlay. I repeat my plea to local authorities to consider using such powers in a strategic way in specific places. We do need holiday homes for our tourist economy. However, we also need powers to be used. Otherwise, the biggest problem with empty houses we are going to face in some parts of the Highlands and Islands in future is that whole villages will be full in summer and empty for 6 months of the year. We need, presiding officer, to ensure that villages are not transformed in the space of a few years from communities into resorts. And on that note, can I warmly welcome the committee's report and commend the hard work which is happening across Scotland, not least in the Western Isles, to bring much needed houses back into use.
Thank you. I call Jeremy Balfour to be followed by John Mason. Mr Balfour is the penultimate speaker in the open debate. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I wish you and others in the Chamber a very happy New Year? And can I congratulate the convener and the committee for the report that they have brought forward. I have actually found this an interesting debate to listen to. I wasn't part of the committee, and I think some of the debate that's taking place has given me food for thought. Clearly, this is a really important subject because, as Mr Finlay has pointed out, there are far too many homeless people on our streets across Scotland, and one of the solutions around this is to have more housing for individuals to live in. Can I also agree with the Minister and congratulate Edinburgh, if late, but better late than never, I suppose, in appointing an appropriate officer for this, because I suspect the issue is actually bigger in Edinburgh than the Council appreciates, and I suspect there will be more empty homes out there than are on record. And also, like the Minister, I would encourage others within the Lothian area to go down the same road. We've had quite an interesting debate from a number of speakers in regard to both compulsory sales orders and compulsory purchase orders. The committee report, I think, points out that only 13 times in the last 3 years have compulsory purchase orders been used by local authorities here in Scotland. And I think, as Polly McNeill pointed out, part of that reason is due to the legal complications around it and local authorities not going down that route. Sorry?
Minister.
I thank Mr Balfour for giving way, Presiding Officer. The Government has refreshed all of the guidance and compulsory purchase orders in recent times. And we have also said to every single local authority that if they want to access the expertise within the Government to help them move compulsory purchase orders along, we will provide them with that help. We cannot do the CPO for them, but we will help as much as we possibly can. And I would urge members, including Mr Balfour, to evangelise to local authorities that that help is available.
Jeremy Balfour.
Yeah, I think that's a very welcome comment, and I hope COSLA and other local authorities hear that, but not only just hear it, but actually take it into practice. Where I am just still slightly confused, and perhaps the Minister could just clarify the situation in his closing remarks, is around compulsory sales order and where we are in regard to that. Now, I do fully understand that the Government have taken with you that there is no time within this Parliament to bring forward primary legislation. But I think Mr Whiteman did make a useful point, which I'm still slightly unsure about, is that will the legislation be consulted on before 2021? Will it be ready to go for any incoming government if they want to use it? And can the other work that needs to be done around that be done so that if whoever's in government post-2021 wants to introduce it, it is there ready to pick up and take off the shelf? So, for example, consultations, speaking to stakeholders, has all been done before. I just generally am slightly unsure about where the Minister and the Government are on that. I think there's been an interesting discussion also, in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, again raised by Mr Whiteman and Mr Finlay, in regard to not just empty homes, but other buildings within our cities and towns that are empty. I had the privilege before coming to this place for working for Scottish Churches Housing Action, and my role was to take derelict churches and to transfer them into homes which were affordable. And I could point you to a number of examples across Scotland where that has happened. And I do think to solve the issue in regard to the housing crisis that we have, we do need to look at all types of property, which are lying empty, and we need to encourage owners who have that property to think, can that be developed into housing which is affordable and which is good for the whole of the community and for the whole of our country. So I have, again, just want to thank the committee for this. I think it's been a helpful debate, and I look forward to the engagement that the Minister will have with the committee towards the end of this year to see where we are and to see where we can go beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you. I call John Mason. Then we move to closing speeches. Mr Mason.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Sorry, you said Mr Balfour was the penultimate speaker, so I guess I am the ultimate speaker. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I'm sorry, were you trying to correct me, Mr Mason?
No, I wouldn't dare correct the Presiding Officer. I was just trying to be slightly humorous, but obviously failed. I do thank you for the opportunity to take part in today's debate. I've not been on the local government committee, but housing, homelessness and empty homes are very high on my agenda, given my constituency in the East End of Glasgow. It seems to me that there's a lot in the report that almost everyone is agreeing with, including, for example, that we want to see empty homes brought back into use as soon as possible. It's accepted that there can be good reasons for a home being empty on a temporary basis. The centrality of local government, together with the advantages of each council having an empty homes officer leading on the topic, and more use of compulsory purchase orders going down that route. I was particularly struck by some of the figures in Shelter's briefing, which I think Graham Simpson has already referred to for today's debate, saying that the average cost of renovating an empty property is between £6,000 and £25,000, whereas a new build has an average cost of £120,000. So it clearly makes economic sense to make better use of the housing we do already have. Now, I accept, as others have said, that the committee inquiry was inevitably limited in scope and could not possibly cover every aspect of this subject. And specifically in paragraph 6, they say that they decided not to include second or holiday homes, and that is fair enough. However, there were a couple of points I wanted to raise that are perhaps particularly relevant to a city like Glasgow, and both of these relate to buildings we do currently have, which may not have been housing in the past, but could well be housing in the future. And I think both Andy Whiteman, Neil Findlay and Jeremy Balfour have also touched on these points. So the first is that shops on the ground floor of tenements, and clearly with the growth of supermarkets and shopping centres, not to mention online shopping, it does seem very unlikely that we will ever need as many small shops underneath tenements as we have traditionally had. Many have become hot food shops and cafes, but many I still see are still sitting empty after long periods of time. And this despite the efforts of the likes of Glasgow City Council and locally for myself, Parkhead Housing Association, who have sought to refurbish these and try and make them more attractive to let, but not always successfully. I think there have been some successful moves to turn such empty shops into flats, but I think there's scope to roll that out on a bigger scale. And to touch on some of the points Mr Findlay's been making, I don't think it's just a planning issue. I think ownership is part of the issue as well. And I think Glasgow City Council, for example, might be reluctant to lose shops in a street like Saltmarket, which is quite central to the city, and yet there just is not the demand in that area for the shops that are currently sitting there. The second issue, the kind of reverse of that, if you like, is where we have many 5- and 6-storey buildings in the city centre of Glasgow, which now only really have the ground floor occupied and being used as shops. And the level above seem to be largely empty. Now, they might have been department stores in the past with multiple levels in use, or they might have been storage space or office space, which are no longer meeting modern requirements. Now, I accept, as others have said, that these are not empty homes in the sense that they used to be homes, but they are spaces which are suitable to be converted into housing and can fit well with the desire, I think, in Glasgow and other cities to increase the city centre population once again. Another fair point that the report makes is that there can be good reasons for a house to be empty for a period. In the executive summary, I note the point about council tax levy on empty homes and that councils should use or could use these powers more flexibly. I have a case at the moment where a tenement was gutted by fire and it has taken about 18 months to restore the flats there. While council tax was waived to start with, it does seem that charging it again after a year is not helping anyone. And I'm still trying to establish whether Glasgow City Council is being too harsh in the way it applies the rules, or whether the rules themselves are binding the Council's freedom to be flexible. In Glasgow City Council's own submission to the committee, they make the point that they feel they have limited powers to deal with empty properties, and they will generally act only if there is a public health nuisance or there are concerns regarding the safety of the building. They also make the point about compulsory sales notices that these orders, will only be attractive if they are simpler and more straightforward than compulsory purchase orders, and Glasgow may actually prefer CPOs to CSOs, even if both are an option. And I suppose all this raises the question of how long it is reasonable to expect a house to remain empty. Again, the report touches on this subject and how families may have many reasons, including emotional ones, for being reluctant to sell the family home. From my own personal experience recently, my mother went into a care home last January, and I suppose we as a family were all a bit reluctant to say that she would never return home, although that was probably what we were all thinking. So at the start of the summer, I encouraged my brother and sister and my mother that we should decide to sell her house, and I have to say it sold fairly quickly, and the new people moved in just before Christmas in December, meaning it was effectively empty for just under a year. But other families can face a much longer process, and paragraph 14 touches on this. Families may disagree among themselves, there may be no power of attorney in place, families can hold out for an unrealistic price. We did not get quite as much as I'd hoped for my mother's house. And at sometimes in some places, houses just do not sell easily. I have very good areas in my constituency, as others have said likewise, like Mount Vernon, where I can see a popular bungalow-type house sitting empty and deteriorating. And there is always a story behind each home. We do not always know what that is. And finally, I just wanted to mention a topic which I believe is very much related to empty homes. If housing generally and tenements specifically are not properly maintained, it increases the likelihood of their becoming empty. So the Tenement Maintenance Report, which was produced last year by the working group, is extremely important in my opinion, and I very much welcome the government's positive response, which I think came out on the 20th of December. If we can keep our tenements better maintained than we have done, it surely increases the chance that they will not gradually become empty. So I very much commend the committee for their work on this topic, and I hope we can keep it in Parliament's agenda in the coming months and years. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing speeches, I call on Pauline McNeill to close for Labour. Ms McNeill, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As the convener James Dornan opened with a speech that there is a strong public interest in dealing with empty homes, that we must have a joined-up approach. And as he points out, perhaps local authorities have an unnecessary risk-averse approach to using the powers that are available to them. But it's Neil Findlay that sets the scene on rising homelessness, rough sleeping, and the need to increase the supply of affordable homes to deal with our housing crisis. And Andy Whiteman, who rightly says, and I agree, the housing is part of our public infrastructure, and how we conceptualise housing is what matters. I think Annabel Ewing makes a very important point about, I was a bit confused myself coming to the debate to calculate the figure that we should use, and I know we had the figures updated by Graham Simpson, that it's important to have a data collection that we can all agree is the accurate one and the one that we want to use, so we know exactly how many empty homes actually exist across Scotland. But for me, out of the debate, what does need to be sorted above all else is this issue of how local authorities apply the range of tools available to them to deal with empty homes. It is quite clear to me that the application of the council tax levy is too crude, and that either needs to be more guidance or more discussion with local authorities about what was expected of them in the use of those powers. Because after all, those powers were given and provided for so that local authorities can take control of the blight that empty homes were creating across their communities, but at the same time bringing those homes back into use. So it's quite clear that that's what the power. So we may need to revisit and reset the use of this particular power. Again, the issue of compulsory sale orders, which the Minister confirmed has only been used 9 times in 3 years, is something which may not be appropriate in many cases. I thought you had confirmed that figure. Okay, but what's clear is that the compulsory sale orders is an alternative to compulsory purchase orders. It doesn't seem to have been that commonly used, but is another way of ensuring that we don't have vacant homes unnecessarily causing blight in our communities. I think I thought more about what James Dornan had to say about the use of compulsory purchase orders and this question of whether or not local authorities are risk averse. And I think in my experience, it may be that where CPOs are used to acquire empty homes, it is a much simpler process, but where compulsory purchase orders are used to mandatorily acquire other properties where there might be wider resistance about CPOs, then you could see that it's a much more difficult legal process. It is also clear that the appointment of empty homes officers is a critical factor, and I think I can't remember who it was that pointed out, it might have been Andy Whiteman, that some officers also have this function contained within their role, so we might have to count them when we're looking at who's doing what across Scotland. But what's clear is that the success of this programme is down to those officers who have that function. I was also struck with the contribution that John Mason has just given in talking about how Glasgow has used their powers in order to remove empty homes from communities. And it's quite clear that it is both an urban and a rural issue. I do have to express some disappointment. I do think there have been missed opportunities to legislate in this Parliament, and I know the Minister has given the reasons for that. We've run out of government time, and I think that is a pity. I do, however, note Kenny Gibson's excellent contribution where he says perhaps there's other legislation that we might prioritise over this, because I know this Parliament does have a very proud record on land reform, and this is also is part of the land reform agenda, albeit to regenerate communities. We've had a very good reputation in this Parliament, and I think it would have been really to follow that reputation if we'd had some legislation in this Parliament. I'd like to echo what Andy Whiteman has suggested, which is if anything is to come of this debate, and if it's for the next Parliament to take forward the powers, I think it would be quite helpful to see what ministers have drawn up to get some sight of that, so that at the very least, if the suggestion is you would hand that over to the next administration, then there's a chance of that being done early in the following Parliament. Also was struck by Alistair Allen's contribution. A lot to consider, I think, in your contribution insofar as the impact on Ireland, which you represent, where you talked about the size of the waiting list seems pretty large, but having the supply at the right locations. And I think a really important point, you can't record the demand in areas where there hasn't been the opportunity to apply for houses. And just you say, in relation to second homes, whole villages will be empty for half the year. So I've not really touched on the question of second homes, but I think it was a very important point. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I think there has been a very serious piece of work done by the committee. I hope the Minister will make a commitment to letting us see what could be done to take it to the edge of this Parliament to ensure that we do reform, and there's quite clear need for reform, I think, of compulsory purchase orders, the use of council tax levies, in order to make sure that in regenerating our communities, in bringing empty homes back into use to help solve the housing crisis, that we have the right legislation to have a radical overhaul and use and make sure that we can make as big a dent as we can in the 40,000 houses that should be used by people to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on Alexander Stewart, close to the Conservatives. Mr Stewart, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be able to close today for the Scottish Conservatives on this debate on empty homes and the report of the committee. Being a member of the Local Government and Communities Committee myself, I'd like to thank all those who gave submissions and provided briefings to the committee during the inquiry. As we already have heard, there's been a myriad of benefits of bringing empty homes back into use, and the committee was quite concise on what it felt should take place, and the report goes into that. Indeed, we were pleased to see that the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership hosted by Shelter Scotland agreed with many of the recommendations within the report itself. They are right to ensure that we at the moment have a rising levels of homelessness, and it's crucial that we make use of the existing housing stock that goes out and we ensure that every property matters, because every empty property does matter in every community that we represent. We in the committee understand that the solely working with empty homes cannot solve the current situation, but it will assist and it will help. And by bringing these vacant properties back into use, we will start to have an impact on the solutions going forward. And I agree that investment in empty homes can prove a very effective way to boost a local economy and support communities, and that regeneration and the work of empty homes can help us to sustain some of these fragile communities that exist. We know that it's not just one single empty home, and a single empty home itself can be seen as an irritation, a nuisance, or even a blight on a location. But if that does become a larger number of empty homes, that leads to a spiral of decline. And we are aware across our own regions and constituencies where that does become the case, where a number of empty properties start to happen, and then that sees everything else seem to implode around about it, and that creates even more difficulties. The importance of this debate focuses on the idea that it's everybody's issue. It's a council issue. It's a housing association issue, it's a landlord, it's a contractor, and recognising the importance of the value of bringing derelict or empty properties back into these homes is important. The committee identified a variety of reasons why empty homes exist, and we've touched on some of them this afternoon. It could be socio-economic factors, the lack of resources to complete housing renovations, economic downturn of the housing market, or even a decline in increasing levels of antisocial behaviour. Empty homes are often a problem in rural areas, and many have touched on that today across their own areas and their own constituencies, where they face a distinct challenge of isolation, of remoteness, the lack of jobs and economic activity within a community can create that, and that is very much the case. But one area we have all talked about today is the one that has made a huge difference, which is the employment of empty homes officers, working across specific councils areas trying to tackle the issue. And I commend and congratulate those councils who have grasped that opportunity, because that has paid dividends. And we've heard that this afternoon in communities right across Scotland where they have taken that initiative. That has proved. But we've also heard that some local authorities have yet to take up that challenge. And like others, I would insist that they do that, because that has shown a real impact by having that one or two individuals who are dedicated to ensuring that takes place where we can. So if I can go on some of the contributions we've had this afternoon, our convener, James Dornan, started off talking about data. Now, data is vitally important because of the way that the data is collected, whether it be through the local council records or local knowledge. But we also talked about the council tax levy and the delays in applications, and that some councils are using that to generate income. Now, that, as I said, we've covered that today, but I don't think anybody believes that is what we should be doing. We should be trying to ensure that councils are supporting individuals so that they can indicate and move forward. The Minister himself talked about the focus on properties and empty properties and the blight on the communities, and that certainly has been the case. Yes, Minister, we need more homes, but you talked about the arrangements and the engagement that we're doing between now and 2040, and that is good to have. But I, like others, are very concerned why some of the recommendations will not be embraced in the next 17 months that we have left in this Parliament's session, and they will have to then move on to the next session. So I think, many have touched on that this afternoon, and it would be quite good to see if we can progress that. My colleague Graham Simpson talked about the compulsory sales orders that are happening, and the inconsistencies that are taking place across individuals who are maybe struggling with the repairs and the levy that comes from all of that. So that has a part to play. Pauline McNeill touched on the areas where we have town problems and city problems in city centres and the need for the access and to address that. And shop owners have a responsibility to support their communities and try and do that. But we also heard from Andy Whiteman about the difficulties that some of that may happen and the legislation that is taking place that has an impact on some of that. And also And he talked about the lack of time, Minister, to ensure that legislation should take place. And I would, like others have said this afternoon, would very much welcome a paper coming out explaining the lack of time where we can, and if there are any opportunities that can be addressed in the last 17 months of this Parliament to ensure that we have that. Annabel Ewing made a very good point about the data and the problems and the differences between 64,000, 84,000 empty homes. We don't yet know exactly what lies because there is not the continuation and the consistency across local authorities. But we do know that in working in partnership that we can manage this process. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, it is crucial that we look at the records and we identify where we are because we know that astonishingly about 3 or 4% of our locations are unoccupied, and even the recent statistics are showing the worrying trends. There are many reasons for this, but there is no doubt that the long-term empty homes can both have an effect on where we go and ensure that we have organisations and situations that ensure that communities thrive and survive. So much work has been done to date, and I recognise that, but the committee indicated there was lots of work taking place. Government have a vital role to play, and kicking things down into long grass is not the way forward. We must work together and have partnerships and ensure that we work together to ensure that our communities thrive and survive. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. And I call on Kevin Stewart, close to the Government Minister, please.
How long have I got, Presiding Officer?
7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This government has a proud record in delivering affordable housing. We've delivered 89,000 affordable homes since coming to power in 2007, compared to 38,015 by the previous administration. However, existing homes continue to form the majority of our housing stock, and that's why empty homes are seen as part of the housing solution to not only increase supply, to end homelessness, but also to create and support vibrant communities too. And that's something that the committee witnessed the need for firsthand when they visited New Milns. I welcome the committee's support for the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership and the Empty Homes Officer model. And I'd like to pay tribute to Shahina Din, who has headed up the Scottish Empty Homes Partnership. She has some power and she wants to do even more. Because when you have that dedicated resource in terms of an empty homes officer, it definitely assists people to bring their homes back into use. And it's a model that works. And it's one that I want to see operating in every part of the country. And in terms of our support for the partnership and support for empty homes officers, one area of support includes the ability for the partnership to provide up to 50% funding for new officers in the first 2 years. I think that's something that every local authority that has yet to put in place empty homes officers, that's something for them to take up. That's a good deal as far as I am concerned. And I would like to pay tribute to some of the officers who are in the front line. I've already spoken about Murdo MacLeod, quite new to the job, doing a brilliant job in the Western Isles, and Alison Allison, who has won in various years the Officer of the Year award. And also, we're about to see the Outstanding Empty Homes Service feature in a BBC documentary, which I understand includes a home that's been returned to use after 24 years. So everything is possible. I could go on at length about these, but those few examples give you an idea of some of the work that's taking place. And I will continue to press local authorities to adopt this successful model wholesale, as the committee has requested. And I'll also continue to press authorities that adopt a blanket approach to policy and the council tax levy to consider better approaches and to learn from their colleagues in local government across Scotland. I know how frustrated Ms Ewing is about that issue. I too am frustrated about that, and I want to ensure that our £400,000 per year investment continues to deliver real benefits on the ground. What we have seen with that investment over the past wee while our new empty homes officers in Edinburgh, Aberdeen and the Western Isles. We've seen additional data to supplement our council tax statistics and help inform discussions with local authorities. Now, data has come up a number of times today, Ms Ewing, Mr Stewart just now. Our data is supplied by each local authority, and any variation from the reality on the ground is only where people are seeking to avoid tax, which I'm sure none of us would condone. Also, our investment is providing an enhanced empty homes advice service, and the new website provides tailored support and an easy way to report empty homes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's just some of the partnership's most recent achievements. And whilst I've been clear that my ambition is to have empty homes officers in every area across the country, I think it's also important that we consider opportunities to widen our reach, particularly within the third sector. And I'll be visiting the YMCA in Glenrothes later this month to do just that. The YMCA is bringing empty homes back into use as move-on accommodation for homeless people, and is a great example of partnership working. And they work with the local empty homes officer to identify suitable properties, access grant funding, and help fund the purchase and provide construction students with valuable work experiences during the refurbishment. I think that's great work that's going on there. I hope that that too can be replicated in many parts of the country. Now, as I said in my opening remarks, I very much welcome the recommendations of the Local Government Committee, and the committee can be assured that I will continue to cooperate and to work with them on all of these issues, because I think that we share exactly the same views on how we must progress in ensuring that we remove the blight of empty homes from our communities. I'll give way to Mr Simpson.
James Simpson.
Thank the Minister for taking the intervention. I don't know if he's about to come on to it, but he'll have heard, yeah, you are, he'll have heard comments from across the chamber, including from Mr Gibson, about compulsory sales orders. Can he not at least commit to start work on this?
Wait, excuse me, wait till he's finished. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I knew exactly what he was going to ask. So, as I've said, I will continue to cooperate with the committee on all of these issues. As I said earlier on, there's not a lack of will on the part of the government in moving this agenda forward. But there is a lack of time and a lack of resource within government to deal with all of this at this moment. I, myself, want to ensure that we move forward in reforming CPOs, and that's why we've done some of the work already during the course of this Parliament. But I also want to go much further in terms of that introduction of compulsory sale orders, and to look at other uplifts that can come from land value. That does take a huge amount of effort in terms of unpicking previous legislation and ensuring that we've got the balance right between what we want to do and the human rights aspect of this. We will continue to work on this. I am not going to be bound by a timescale, because I do not want to come up with a timescale that may well be unworkable because of the other work that is going on. But what I will do, Presiding Officer, without doubt, is to continue to let the committee and Parliament know how we're progressing on these issues. And I know from some of the folks who have been involved in the debate today that if I don't do that, I'll be facing very many questions anyway. So I will commit to ensuring that I continue to update Parliament on how we progress on this issue. I think this has been a very good debate today.
Please conclude.
And I'd just like to thank all of those across Scotland who are working well on this issue.
I thank you too. Thank you. And now calling Sarah Boyd, please, to close for the committee. 8 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think this has been a really good start to 2020. It's important that this debate was our first debate. And the other thing I want to say at the very start is what an interesting debate where there are disagreements, there's analysis, there's been research done, but coming right across the chamber, there is pretty much strong agreement that tackling the empty homes problem is something we all agree needs to happen, that work has started, that has started through collaborative work through both the Scottish Government, through funding and our local authorities and organisations like Shelter, but that much more needs to be done and we need faster and more concerted action. So it's good that, as Kenny Gibson said, both in the committee we had a collegiate and collaborative work programme on this issue. I wasn't here for that, presiding officer. I am praising this report that I saw at the very end. The hard work was done earlier in last year, but I think it is a good report. And I want to highlight one or two of the things James Dornan, our committee convener, highlighted at the start, that different communities face their own unique challenges when it comes to the issue of empty homes. But the common thread is that empty homes which are left to decay cause blight on communities, and there is a strong public interest to bring them back into use. And we have all agreed on that across the chamber. So the key thing is now how we make this happen. And the examples that were given by Annabel Ewing and Tom Mason, I think, concentrate the mind on the damage that is caused to other neighbours and to other people living next door to empty homes. And that really should make us move into action. I thought the comments where Neil Finlay spoke passionately about homelessness and Pauline McNeill talked about waiting lists highlighted the fact that there is a benefit in bringing existing homes that are not being used back into use, because there are huge numbers of people waiting for affordable, accessible houses across the country. And as members have said, not just in our town and city centres, some of our smaller towns as well, and crucially in our rural communities, where the addition of 2 to 4 houses can be absolutely transformative. So we need to push for this, and we need to make sure that all of our local authorities have not just the empty homes officers, but they have the partnerships locally that join up housing, that join up planning, that join up regeneration, so that it's not just one part of the council, it's a pressure right across the council to deliver. And I think the other thing I wanted to highlight, it was mentioned by John Mason, but the research done by Shelter, just look at the numbers. It's usually about £120,000 to build a new home, but it can be £6,000 to £25,000 to regenerate and bring back to use an existing home. So surely we should say that this has to have political priority as part of the housing programme going forward, and to look at how private owners can be brought into that picture so that they can be supported, cajoled, and
Ms.
given
Boyack,
advice.
please sit down. This was a very important and very interesting debate on homelessness and empty houses, and there's too many casual conversations going on this very important issue. You should be listening to Ms. Boyack. Ms. Boyack.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm going to take a note of that for future reference. It's not happened to me before. For those colleagues who have joined us, it has been a constructive debate. There's been political agreement across the chamber, and there has been a mood that right across our communities we need to do more of this. I think in particular on the town centre regeneration issue, several colleagues mentioned this, and the importance of councils taking a much more strategic approach to restoring town centres by joining up their policy approach and their investment, and making sure that we're not just looking at town centre regeneration in terms of retail and offices, but we do think about bringing people back into our towns and our city centres. And I agree with Andy Whiteman that we should maybe take a look back at the Malcolm Fraser Town Centre review of 2013. Just look at that with the benefit of 6 years hence and say, what more would we do with that report? What more needs to be done now? And housing is a good way to refresh town centres, and it also gives people access to employment where they don't have lengthy commuting journeys. And that point was made by a couple of people. I think the other point that was made towards the end was about accessibility of homes as well. If we're thinking about homes above shops, obviously there are stairs or lift involved, but if you're converting ground floor properties, that is one of the key properties we need with our ageing population to give people accessible homes, and that's something that surely we should be looking at. There's been a couple of things where there was agreement on, where there's work that needs to be done. Data sets are not sufficiently accurate, and some good comments about how that might be done. Also, an approach about how we look at the location of empty homes at a much more granular level so that local authorities can target solutions to meet the needs of each area, because the human and the economic needs of getting our houses back into use was something that was mentioned by all of us. The council tax levy, a good tool to be used appropriately, but not just as a revenue-raising tool. It's got to be used to incentivise people to bring their houses back into use, and the support and the advice both from Scottish Government to local authorities and then from local authorities to housing owners was absolutely crucial, and I think that does need to be followed through. I think the points made by James Dornan, Polly McNeill, Graham Simpson and Annabel Ewing again show that there's agreement across the Chamber for action. One of the things that I think would be good to come from the Minister in the future would be a refresh on financial incentives. His point about government spending £400,000 investment has delivered. What more could be done to accelerate this process and get more homes back into use, or even prevent them becoming empty in the first place? There was a lot of discussion on compulsory purchase orders and compulsory sale orders. As somebody who took part in the Community Empowerment Act debate in 2015, we were debating compulsory sale orders and the need for a basket of mechanisms, both to encourage and to push owners into action. And it was also something we debated in the Land Reform Act in 2016. There has been cross-party agreement, I think, across the Chamber that we would like the Minister to reflect on this issue, and we would like the Minister to be given support by his colleagues to prioritise this. They should not just be the Housing Minister saying, I would like this to happen. There is something, very briefly,
this is not about my colleagues, it is about capacity within the civil service itself in terms of the legal aspects of this. I cannot stress this enough. Unpicking mid-19th century legislation in terms of previous compulsory purchase order legislation is not an easy task to do.
That's true, and that's why the Scottish Land Commission prepared a report and published it in August 2018. We are not starting from scratch. We've had the land reform debate, we've had the Community Empowerment Act, you've had the expert group set up by the Scottish Land Commission. There has been work done. We are not now demanding that you bring forward the finished legislation before 2021. But we would like to see work in progress. There has been work done on human rights, the rights of owners, site identification, building on the work of experts, looking at the issue of vacant and derelict land. So we are not starting from scratch. It is complex, but Parliament has legislated before on land reform, and it has worked. The Community Empowerment Act has seen communities being able to buy land in their communities, or sometimes to get owners to work with them without even selling the land. So this has to be work in progress. We get the fact that there's not infinite resource, but we would like more resource and a political priority to attach to this, because as everybody has agreed, this makes sense. It avoids blight in our communities, it avoids economic disruption, it enables houses to be brought back into use so that people can afford the houses where they need them and that they can access work. That is something we all agree on. So my finishing point is, there has been agreement. We would like to add that pressure to the Minister to make progress. This is not an issue for after 2021. Some progress can be made before then, and you have the collaborative and constructive support across the Chamber to help you in that work. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, and that concludes our debate on empty homes in Scotland. The next item is a committee announcement, and I call on Edward Mountain, convener of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, to make an announcement on their inquiry into construction and procurement of ferry vessels in Scotland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As convener of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, I'm pleased to announce that we have launched an inquiry into the construction and procurement of ferry vessels in Scotland. On the 18th of December last year, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Economy and Fair Work announced publication of the final report of the Ferguson Marine Programme Review Board. This sets out an updated timetable and outstanding costs for the fulfilment of the contract to build 2 hybrid ferries to serve the Clyde and Hebrides ferry network, originally placed with Ferguson Marine in October 2015. The report indicates a delayed delivery range for the vessel 801 MV Glensannox of October to December 2021, and a new delivery range for the vessel 802 of July to October 2022, and an estimated outstanding cost for the delivery of the 2 vessels of £110.3 million over and above the monies that have already been paid. As part of the inquiry, we will consider the key findings and recommendations of the Ferguson Marine Programme Review Board and the impact of the repeated delays to the completion of these two vessels on the specific routes and island communities who are awaiting their delivery. We will also consider the related matter of the Scottish Government taking public ownership of Ferguson Marine in October 2019. These matters have important implications for the future procurement of maritime vessels to serve the Clyde and Hebrides Ferries network and for the ongoing development and updating of the Scottish Government's ferries plan and vessel replacement and deployment programme. Our intention in launching this inquiry is to explore the implications in some detail and above all to ensure that the appropriate lessons are learned for the future. We plan to take oral evidence and written evidence from a wide range of stakeholders, and I would encourage all interested parties to contribute to our call for written evidence, which runs until the 7th of February. We also plan to visit Ferguson Marine Shipyard to visit firsthand the current state of progress on the hybrid vessels contract and to talk to members of the workforce and management on site. Presiding Officer, we look forward to reporting back to the Parliament with our findings and recommendations once the committee has completed its inquiry later this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to turn now to decision time, and there is just the one question this evening. The question is that motion 20280 in the name of James Dornan on empty homes in Scotland be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed, and that concludes decision time. We'll move on now to members' business in the name of Tom Arthur on celebrating the work of the Leven Valley Defibrillator Community Partnership. We'll just take a few moments for members and the ministers to change seats. Just a pause.